Hey, Tooth and Corners, it's Jonathan Van Horn here. Today's episode, we're going to be talking about your fees. Now, this is an area that not a lot of people talk about, so I thought I would bring it to light because it's a real question in terms of practice management and business management and even some kind of strategy / discipline, even some like internal feelings you may have about your fees. What we're going to be talking about today is if you should raise them. So I'm recording this in January of 2025. It's a new year, which means that you should have thought about raising your fees this year. So your patient fees, how much you charge your patients for the different services that you have and the different dental codes that you're charging them on a daily basis. Yeah, sometimes you got to raise them. And this is something that as a new business owner, I don't think very many people talk about it very much. And so I think it's really important to put some resources out there to talk about it more. So in this episode, we're going to talk about things like, why do you need to raise the fees? Is it even fair to your patients? We're going to talk about the patient retention of what happens after you raise your fees and just kind of the circle of life of patients. We're also going to talk about things like how much is too much to raise your fees. And finally, we're going to talk about how you can do it in your practice to make it be a standard operating procedure, as well as what is going to be the financial impact to your business if you make this a part of your business's 10, 20, 30 year path. So buckle up. It's a fun episode. It's interesting. I think that it pulls from a lot of different pieces of our psyche, and I think you'll find some surprises. And if you're an insurance-driven practice, then you should still listen to this because there's still pieces of this that you need to understand and different strategies and information in here that you'll find helpful also. So let's go. So let's start with the fundamental question, and that is, why should you raise your fees in the first place? Well, it's pretty clear that costs are going up everywhere and dental practices aren't immune to this either. So let's break down the main areas and factors that drive the reasons why you should increase your fees. First, it's the basic cost of living. So as an example, like health insurance, if you look at your health insurance today compared to say 5-10 years ago, if you even have the same policy, it's probably doubled since then. So cost of living for you goes up, cost of living for everybody goes up. Then you've got things like utilities and supplies and lab costs and all the things that go along with that. And all of those things go up as well. So cost of bread goes up. Guess what? Cost of supplies goes up. It's the same thing. There's also the fact that your industry changes. There's continual investment in technology, equipment. It's constantly evolving. New technologies come out. Treatment methods emerge. There's training you've got to do, education, etc. Digital imaging systems, CAD/CAM technology, new sterilization equipment. Things break. Things got to get repaired. And these things cost more. And these investments directly improve the quality of care that you can offer. So maintaining appropriate fee levels ensure that you can invest in these improvements and keep your practice at the forefront of dental care. So it's about creating a sustainable cycle where better fees enable better care, which in turn justifies the investment in your practice. Now, another factor is staffing cost. The dental workforce, especially hygienists, are in high demand right now. And so to keep quality team members, you need to offer competitive wages. So don't forget about the ongoing costs of training and development that go along with each of those people as well. So as an example, wages as a whole went up about 4 to 5% each year over 2022 through 2024. And you can check these stats from the Bureau of Labor Statistics Employment Cost Index. And for that data, it's called the average wage index that you look at. The caveat to that is that that data is overall, not necessarily specifically to the dental field, where certain positions like the hygienist mentioned earlier are getting harder and harder to find. So your market may vary on the percentage that went up. It could be a lot more than that. And here's also another crucial thing to understand about percentages. Increases are cumulative. So if you have a 4% increase this year, a 4% increase next year, and then 4% increase the year after that, in terms of your cost, it compounds over time. So that 444 doesn't equal 12. It's more like 12.5 to 13. So over the course of a 10-year period, it can really start to add up with that cumulative effect of being more than an incremental effect. Now, are fee increases fair? Let me share a personal story. As a CPA firm owner, I used to be absolutely terrified of raising our fees, and I still hate doing it. But here's what I've learned, and that is, if we don't adjust our fees periodically, we risk one of two outcomes. First, we might not be able to pay competitive rates for quality team members. Second, the business could become unprofitable and eventually shut down. And either way, clients end up without service. So you can't avoid necessary changes and expect things to work out in the long run. Now, a couple of years ago, we created a more dynamic fee structure that doesn't require us to change the fees as much. The increases still happen, but they're related to the changes that happen to our clients. So it creates a pretty good dynamic. And here's my honest opinion. And that is, if a client leaves over a 2 to 10% fee increase, then we probably weren't doing that great of a job for the client in the first place. And in a way, it becomes an accountability tool for us to always deliver the absolute best service that we can. It's definitely a balancing act in like maintaining profitability while doing a killer job for your clients, in my case, and patients for the dentist listening. It can be complex, and you've got to balance that, and you've got to work through that as a business owner. So is it fair? Yes, I think so, but it has an important caveat to that. It's only fair if you continually work to be the best that you can be for the people that are paying you the money. Because if you've just raised the fees arbitrarily without any internal accountability for service quality, then no, that wouldn't be fair. So that's the caveat on this whole thing is if you're going to increase your fees continually, then make sure that you're investing in the business, not just raising fees to raise them. Let's move to the question of what if my patients leave? And this is a question that keeps a lot of people up at night because it feels bad to raise fees. Like you don't want your cost to go up, so you don't want your patients' cost to go up, so you don't like to do it. Here's a little secret, and that's generally fewer patients will leave than you think. And again, if they leave over a small fee increase, you probably weren't meeting their expectations in the right way, and they're probably already shopping around, or if they're extremely price sensitive, they might not be ideal for your practice model at the end of the day. Now, every practice is different, so your market may vary, but think about the natural progression of a dental practice. At different points in your career, you'll be in different phases. So early on, you might focus on actively growing and attracting new patients, whereas later on, you'll shift to maintaining a more stable patient base. Eventually, you might transition to a higher fee model based on your experience and expertise. And when patients leave due to fees, they often move to practices that are in that growth phase of their life cycle because they offer lower fees. This creates space in your schedule for patients who value your experience and service level. And so it's a natural evolution that happens in every practice. And that's kind of like the circle of life for patients, if you will. So let's move on to the question of like, how much is too much to raise your fees? And we're going to be in the nitty gritty of this. And it's a tricky question. So let's dive into some of the more important pieces that I think of this. Let's talk about on a broad level. The first is that if you're going to do this, it's easier to do this every year, a small percentage increase than it is to hit your patients just once every 4 or 5 years with like a 10 to 20% increase. And so it's better to make this a standard operating procedure. And it helps you keep up with the rising costs in real time rather than having to play catch up. So let's start with some benchmarks in terms of inflation. In 2023, inflation was like 4.12%. In 2022, it was 8%. In 2021, it was almost 5%. In 2024, estimates are a little bit lower at around 3%. But remember, that's over the course of the total U.S. Certain areas of the country are hit by inflation more than others. So in terms of raising your rates, those percentages, 5, 8, 5, 3, those really aren't crazy numbers to think of in terms of like fees that you could be raising every year on an annual basis for your patients over the last 3 or 4 years. Now, what does that number end up being if you were to be cumulative over that 5, 8, and then 5 again, and then 3? Well, simple math is 5, 8, 5, and 3 should be 21%, but the cumulative effect could put that upwards still at 22, 23%. Now, if you haven't raised your fees in the last 4 years, just think about that for a second. If you haven't raised your fees in 4 years, then your cost of doing business could be up to 25%, maybe even more in certain areas of the country. And if you are going to knee-jerk reaction to that today to raising your fees 25%, your patients are going to feel that. Like they're going to very specifically understand. So I find it really important as a strategy to tell people like, hey, make this a standard operating procedure, make it a thing that happens every 6 months or a year, however much it's going to be able to make that. And we'll talk about that again in a second. So in terms of like how to come up with a percentage or a number to come up with, there are a bunch of different resources that are out there. So as an example, Henry Schein will typically give you a study for your zip code. But I think the data that comes from that is typically just from Dentrix users, so people that use their practice management software. And we've had clients that have said they've gotten it. It's really unreasonable. So like they'll compare that to another option that has more data, and the one with more data is way different than that one is. Now, I don't know for a fact if that's how they pull that data. I would think that would make sense. That's how they pull the data, is they just pull it from Dentrix and accumulate it in that way. So if like you're in an area that doesn't have very many patients that use Dentrix, then what are you going to do, right? So you're probably not going to have a whole lot of data in that study that you actually get. Another option that I like that's completely free is fairhealthconsumer.org. You just go to that website, you hit the dental button, and it'll let you put in your zip code, and you can put in a dental code, and you can see what a decent fee looks like. I think you can check like up to 5 codes a day for free. Now, the downside to that is it's only an average, it's a dollar amount, specific dollar amount, and it's not like a range. So you can't tell like, hey, I want to be at the high end of the range or the low end of the range. but the rates are usually pretty good and pretty reasonable for the areas. Again, your market may vary, some are lower than others. Another popular option is the Wasserman National Dental Advisory Service Comprehensive Fee Report. They do this annually. For $150, you can get the percentile ranges for a 3-digit zip code area. So in other words, I live in Little Rock, Arkansas, so the zip code of our office is 72223, where my home is in a different zip code, but they both begin with 722. So that's the 3-digit zip code area that would be covered in that fee schedule. Now, this is great because it does give you a bit more honed in of numbers, but it's limited because the 722 zip code is a very large area of Arkansas. There's a whole lot of places that goes into. It can be a very rural area. It can be a metropolitan area. It could even be an area that's like a really affluent area of the city where with the 722 zip code, and if you look up the averages, you're going to see that really affluent street even, and you're going to see like some rural area of Arkansas be inside the same amount of data. So it's still limited, but it can give you kind of just a sanity check. And since it has the percentiles in there from the lowest all the way up to the highest, then you can make some assumptions based off of your understanding of your area to where it should be able to go in at. And typically you won't be able to ask like a CPA for this type of information because they're not going to know your area like you know it unless you've got a CPA that's literally like down the street or super familiar with your town and your street and area and practice and things like that. It can skew the data, but if I had a practice, that would be the resource I would use. I haven't seen a great 5-digit zip code resource yet. So if you have one, put it in the comments, let me know, shoot me an email. I'd be interested in knowing if there's a really good one that's out there. Because the only ones that I've seen that are 5-digit zip codes are actually, they're just cost of living modifiers to the 3-digit zip code one. So they basically say, hey, this area is a 10% higher cost of living zip code than this zip code is. So we're just going to put a 10% modifier to the 3-digit zip code data. So that's a bit limited. The other limitation is that these tools are almost always surveys. So it may not be super accurate. And like you think this information would be easier to find, but there's some laws that are pricing control laws that try to protect the consumers. I have a like conspiracy tinfoil hat thought that's probably insurance companies that are lobbying for that. And speaking of insurances, I mentioned for our insurance driven practices that are out there, you obviously, if you raise your fees are locked to what your rates are with your insurances. We've had great success with our clients with companies like Unlock the PPO and PPO Profits to help you renegotiate your insurance. Renegotiating your insurance on a regular basis, I think it's every 2 or 3 years, depending on what type of insurance you have, can be really, really effective. You can also do this sometimes when you add new partners in or create a new entity or things like that. And it can actually do a lot if you have a really good and savvy negotiator negotiating that for you. Some of our clients like to do it themselves. It's one of those things, if you've never done it before, you're actually going to be able to do the best thing. Some of these negotiators, they're going to know the people at these insurance companies, and they're going to be able to make it be hopefully pretty painless. And they're going to know like where they will give and where they'll be able to get in other places too. Because some of the strategies that they'll use is they'll say like, this practice does a ton of crowns, so we're going to give back, even maybe lower our fee on some of these not much used dental codes to create net wins for the practice. It can be a pretty complex way of doing it, but we have seen clients receive success with that. And there's also the option of going out of network. That is a possibility as well, or even just dropping the insurances totally and becoming more fee for service. That is an option. It's a hard option. It's a difficult one, but it does exist as a potential for this as well. So let's move over to like implementation strategies, and let's talk about how to actually put these fee increases into practice. So again, I said it before, I'll say it again. The key is to make these fee reviews a standard operating procedure in your practice. It's just like Christmas. It comes every year. So it's something that happens just automatically. It's just like maybe like checking your reports on a daily or monthly basis, or whatever it may be. So start by putting it on your calendar right now. So you can do this annually, you can do it semi-annually, just set a recurring reminder and make sure this isn't just a one-time thing. Have a team member on that calendar event to remind you to do it as well. It needs to become part of your practice's regular business cycle. Because when you establish this as a standard operating procedure, it removes a lot of the emotional weight from the decision. It's just another aspect of running a successful practice. Now, also, if you have an in-house membership plan, don't forget those fees need to get increased as well. And also, there's a trick there. If you have these in-house plans and a patient has an issue with the fee increases, you can actually use the in-house plan to offer as an option to get a lower fee, because you can say, hey, I don't like that the fee went up this amount. You say, well, if you don't like that, then if you join our plan, you get X% off of all treatments. And so that actually remove the fee increase, and it's actually a good savings for you. So it's actually can be a conversion tool if you actually have one of those membership plans. When it comes to timing, like when to do these things, January is usually like the most logical time to do it, the month that we are in right now, because that's when most people expect those changes. But you might also consider splitting different procedure types across the year to make the changes a little bit more manageable and a bit easier to look at. And some practices like to align their increases with the increases to insurance fee schedules or decreases to insurance fee schedules as well, because it just makes sense from an administrative time. And they're updating the fee schedules in the system for what the insurance is going to give you anyways. Then that's a good time to have them do the fee for service fees or the cash fees as well. Now, once you've done this, another important piece is to think about is your team, because some team members may not be comfortable with this, but you got to talk to them about the things that we just talked about. The fact that this is a regular part of your business operations. And so they should easily be able to explain to patients like why we're doing this. And it's to maintain a high level of care that your practice provides. There's no need for a formal announcement or anything like that unless your state requires it. But both your team and patients should come to expect and understand what these fee increases are. And again, there may be team members that you'll have to reinforce the reasons why you're doing this. Some people take exception to the fact that you raise fees for patients. They may feel that same emotional thing that we talked about earlier, which is you don't like when your price goes up. As an example, if your price of your Netflix subscription goes up by $3 a month, which is like a 30% increase, which I think they actually increased it by more than that in the last couple of years, it doesn't feel good, right? You don't like it, but at the same time, what are you going to do? The cost of everything goes up, so we've got to pay more. It's just supply and demand economics. And that team member, if they cause issue with that, the way that I typically have talked to people about it is, hey, do you want to make more money? Do you want to increase your take-home pay? I want to be able to pay you more because I know that your cost of living has gone up, and I know that the staffing wages as a whole for the entire industry has gone up. I want to be able to pay you more. If we don't charge more, then we're not going to be able to do that. Now, this is a trap that I think that a lot of growing practices don't realize. So in other words, if you're in that growth cycle that we talked about earlier, you're growing and your revenue is growing. And so you just feel like you're making more money. But with the way that you're growing by growth, not by your fee increases, at some point you're going to stop growing. At some point you're going to hit capacity. We've talked about capacity in prior episodes. And once you're at that stabilization area, that's when your cost will go up, but your patient base will typically stay about the same. And so either you've got to increase your repertoire of services you add that are high cost services and start selling those to your patients, or else you're going to eventually get your profits eaten away by cost of living adjustments, by staffing expense going up, by your lab fees and supplies, utilities, rent, things like that are just going to go up. It's going to eat you alive, and it's tough. So get in the mindset, because I think most of the people that listen to this podcast are likely in practices that are in that growth mode or at least trying to be in a growth mode. So this is just a critical piece of your annual business processes, standard operating procedures that you should have and you need to have in order to be able to be really successful, even if you're in the growth cycle. I can make an argument that in the growth cycle that these fee increases likely should be slightly less than if you're at the stabilization period or in the at capacity period. But you need to get this as a part of just how your brain works with how your business works. Because even if it's just a 1% increase over a 10-year period, you're going to be really happy that you did that 1% increase over that 10-year period 10 years from now, more so than just saying, hey, 10 years from now, hey, I'm going to have to increase everything 30% to keep up with everything. So keep going with it, keep doing it. It's really important. And again, you may have to justify this to team members. You may have to justify this to patients. The way that you do that is by framing it around the fact that this is how you afford to be able to continue to offer really good care, how you afford to have really good team members that are around, and the way that you can continue to invest in the growth of the business and the growth of your patient, the growth of your care as well, while being a service-based business. So let's talk about the financial impact of what raising your fees actually means. This is some kind of interesting math, what happens. So let's say that your practice is collecting about 80 grand a month. So you implement a 5% fee increase, and we'll say that 95% of your patients stay. So you raise your fees 5%, but lose 5% of your patients. Now your new production would be about the same, about $80,000, but you have 5% less of patients to work on. In other words, you raise your fees 5%, you lost 5% of your patients, and now you have the same amount of revenue, but less work to do. The really interesting part about that is that now that you've freed up that 5% of your capacity, then that seemingly small increase in revenue can actually fund really significant improvements in your practice because you've reduced your patient base, which means you should reduce some of your variable costs, such as your supplies, lab fees, things like that, because you shouldn't have as many. So those funds can then be allocated to help improve things in your practice, like investments in equipment or continuing education, maybe improving the lobby or something like that, giving raises to team members who are doing a great job of delivering great value to your patients. And all of a sudden you can reallocate those resources to those things and you have less work to do. And so now you have capacity. You see all these things go in and now new patients come in that are attracted to all of those really good things that you can do. And that can add up to be tons and tons of appointments. Let's say that you've got that 5% and you're at a practice that has 2,000 patients, 5% leaving, that's 100 patients. And you've just freed up capacity for 100 patients that are going to be coming in at your higher fee level than you were before. And now you're going to have even more revenue to be able to generate to continue this process. And if we think about this over that 10-year period again, and you started doing this 10 years ago, and it's a part of your everyday resource, it's a part of your reflexes, it's a standard operating procedure, it's just a thing that you do, then you're going to be in such a better place 10 years from now than you are today if you've done this. And then again, those 5% of patients that leave, remember, they left because they're going to go back out there into the wild to that person that's in that growth phase of their business that's trying to attract new patients and get people in. They are likely a lower cost provider because they have an empty schedule and they're able to bring people in. And you got to be willing to let those patients go because they are the people that didn't see the value in your office, but the people that stayed, they did see the value in your office. That means that if you're reinvesting in everything, you're making their services better and you're making it a win-win for everybody all around. So they're paying you more. You've kept up with everything. You've continued improving your practice, investing in technology and making that patient's visit as good as it can be. Let's look at the counter to all this. What if you don't raise your fees? So if you don't raise your fees and keep fees static year over year over year, that 10-year period we're talking about, then you're effectively just going to take a pay cut every year. Once you hit capacity, your profit margins are going to start to erode, which will then affect everything we talked about. You're not going to be able to invest in new technology, or if you do, it's going to come out of your pocket. You're not going to be able to keep good team members there. You're going to have high turnover, which means lots of training and lots of pain of keeping people on. It's going to be hard to maintain and improve the quality of care you can provide over time because it's going to be too expensive. You're not going to have the time for it because if you do hit capacity and you don't raise your fees, then you're going to be at capacity. The profit margin erodes away. That 5%, those 100 patients we talked about before, they don't go away. They stick with you, but they don't pay you a whole lot because they were already price sensitive. In a way, a lot of the patients that are price sensitive are also the patients that I would think would be more likely on average to say no to a treatment plan that you provide as well. Think about it in that way also. Patients that stayed are a higher probability to likely say yes to the treatment plan that you've offered them. So that's another important caveat to think about in the ways of thinking like why you increase your fee schedules. It's like an optimization of your practice's a patient base in a way also. You naturally attrition away those really fee conscious patients, but keep the patients that are valuing your care or whatever money that they're providing to your practice, they are considering that an equal trade of dollars for value received, which is an important thing in business to understand. And something that personally, I feel like that's almost to the level of being sacred, right? If someone gives our company money, I want to deliver maximum value in return for the dollars they give our company. I obsess over it. And that is something that has to be, and that is the market saying to you, we think that this is valuable. We think this is valuable. We think this is valuable. We think this is valuable. Otherwise, if they didn't think this was valuable, they wouldn't give you that money and they'd go somewhere else to give somebody else the money because it's just the lowest cost because it's what they want to pay for that service or whatever it is they're getting. So when you frame it that way, it just becomes a lot more clear that regular thoughtful fee increases aren't just about making more money. They're about creating a very sustainable practice that can continue serving your community and just build your practice to be a great practice. And again, remember, it's really important to say that this is not just about making more money. It's about sustaining and improving your practice. And so think of it almost like preventative care for your practice. So taking care of things now prevents bigger problems later. So here's what I want you to do after you've listened to this episode. This is homework for you from a podcast. Pull up your fee schedule, compare it with a couple of the resources I talked about today. And if you haven't raised fees in the last, like say 18 months, you're probably due for a review. So this is Jonathan Van Horn with Tooth and Coin, helping you with building a better dental practice. Thanks for listening. If you have any questions, comments, put them in the comments. I read all the comments that come through in the episodes. If you're on YouTube, if you're a podcast listener, feel free to leave us a review. Hope you found value in today's episode. And thanks for being a Tooth and Coiner. See you next time. Bye. Thanks for listening to the Tooth and Coin podcast. If you enjoyed the show, we'd really appreciate it if you could leave us a 5-star review as well as a written review. Your feedback not only helps us improve, but also helps other dental professionals find our podcast and benefit from the financial insights that we share. So thanks for your support, and we'll catch you in the next episode where we'll continue to explore the business side of dentistry.